Recording has started. Hello, everyone. My name is Will Hull, and this will be Unit 2 for New Mexico for Division D for their hearing for the We the People National Finals. In a moment, I'll have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge questions. My microphone will be muted during the hearing. However, I will be the person putting up the 1 minute, as well as the time sign for you to know when those periods of the hearing have happened. Also, I suggest if you are able to see it up in the very top right-hand corner, there's a view little icon there. You can click on that and choose the gallery view. It'll ensure that you're able to see me hold up those cards. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will give some brief feedback, and then we'll conclude the hearing. At this time, I'll go ahead and pass the microphone over to the judges, where they'll be able to introduce themselves.
Okay, so welcome, New Mexico, and congratulations for making it thus far. My name is Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota. Let me turn things over now to my colleague, Tim.
Good afternoon and congratulations. My name is Tim Igo. I am a lawyer, writer, and magazine editor. I work at the State Bar of Arizona in Phoenix.
Hello, my name is Chuck Dunlap. I'm a president and CEO of the Indiana Bar Foundation in Indianapolis, Indiana.
And if you could please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Alexander Paponi, and my favorite framer is Alexander Hamilton.
I'm Leah Mascareñas, and my favorite framer is James Madison.
I'm Avery Urea, and my favorite framer is George Washington.
And I'm Eva Haig, and my favorite framer is John Jay. We're sophomores at Cottonwood Classical in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and our teacher is Mr. Bill Torres.
All right, that was a smart way to introduce yourself. I have not seen that before. I think that's effective. Well done. So I will read the question to you with the prompts. We are, of course, doing Unit 2, and we are doing Question 2. When I am finished with the question, the floor will be yours. So the question is, one founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? And what alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? The floor is yours. You may begin.
John Adams once said, quote, "Representative democracy and trial by jury are the heart and lungs of liberty," end quote. Representation and equality of opportunity make the dream of liberty a reality in a world where humans constantly seek to oppress one another. Many methods of representation were discussed, but every end goal was to do what was best for the country as a whole. We agree that the trustee theory of representation is superior to the delegate representation. The trustee theory incorporates some personal opinions of representative decisions, which can act as a filter and most definitely create more educated choices and have the people's best interests in mind. Edmund Burke said, quote, "Your representative owes you, not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion," end quote. The people generally only think about their own wants and needs, while representatives can take a more objective stance in order to find what is truly best for the country as a whole.
The trustee theory takes the people's opinions and uses that along with the representative's own knowledge in order to produce a greater benefit, with the hope that the trustee possesses civic virtue. If this criteria is met, the representative is providing for the will of the people as well as preventing the opportunity for mob rule. Although the founders settled on a representative democracy, many other forms were considered, such as a pure democracy as well as a pure republican government. The founders considered pure democracy in a similar form the ancient Athenians practiced. Pure democracy allowed the citizens to directly contribute and participate in their government rather than having different levels of representation. This wasn't ideal for large communities where too many voices could be drowned out without some form of representation. On the contrary, a pure republic does not take the people's individual opinions into consideration as much as it does the opinions of elected representatives. With this sentiment in mind, James Madison said in Federalist 10, quote, "The representatives must be raised to a certain number in order to guard against the cabals of a few," end quote.
A Republican government has the potential to leave out the interests of the minorities if used on a large scale. The trustee theory does hold a similar sentiment, but incorporates more of the people's voices by ensuring the representatives are educated and possess civic virtue. With this in mind, the founders decided to compromise between democracy and Republican government to ensure the majorities, along with minorities, have equal opportunities to have their voices heard. We believe the political theory of representation would positively improve government in the 21st century compared to what has been done in the past. This model combines the usage of the delegate theory as well as the trustee theory to better represent the people as well as account for the minority. The Lumen textbook written from OpenStax stated that in the political model, quote, members of Congress act as either trustee or delegate based on rational political calculations about who is best served, end quote.
This theory should be more stressed in the US because in general, sometimes either the nation is put above the constituency or vice versa. The former is more concerning for the general public. However, the latter also relates to the idea of mob rule. James Madison stated the, quote, majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens, if such a common motive exists, end quote. Madison saw that if the majority moved to take away the minority's rights, this wouldn't be difficult. Relating to today, social media has become an echo chamber of isolated views that restrict citizens from unbiased information about opposing sides and parties. The majority who get caught in these isolated views can easily move to oppress the minority, especially if they do not accurately understand the other side. It would be ideal to put our trust in one delegate to represent the people and halt the progress of the irrational majority who seek to alienate the minority. Although this is what is ideal, the political model is more realistic to stand in place of the delegate theory. We agree with Madison's views and believe that representation is the most important device of the people within any form of government.
All right, just beat the buzzer there. Thank you, Bill. Very nice job. Now is the time when we will do a little Q&A. I'll start things off. I want to bring us back to the constitutional debate and the Anti-Federalists, who, as you know, were critical of the Constitution, including the mode of representation that Madison seems to recommend. One of the things, or two of the things the Anti-Federalists recommended, somewhat interrelated, were term limits and rotating representatives, getting some fresh blood in there. What do you think about this argument? What are the pluses and what are possibly the minuses we might have that?
I feel like limited terms in government is a very important thing because, as we can see, power can be controlled and people can become power hungry and abuse their power once they stay there for too long. And I feel like this rotation and difference between seats in government can act as a filter to make government flow better and make the people's voices be heard more in different ways that can, in the end, be good for the country.
In addition to what my colleague is saying, I believe that rotation of power, especially in addition to that, rotation of representatives is important because that gives less time for people to create an alternative agenda that does not suit the constituents or does not apply to their state or what the people need, which is, of course, what this government is centered around and what was widely talked about during the Constitutional Convention when the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were both trying to find a middle ground of how the government should represent the people and how the people should have control over the government.
Also, to answer your question about some of the negatives that may be involved would be with rotating representatives is that stuff would be slowed down to get done because there's so many different views that are being looked at. And something that the trustee theory incorporated was that trustees would best discern what to do. And so when it rotates so constantly, it can get in the way of that process.
Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on your conversation about social media and going back to Madison's statement that minority factions are not so troublesome. In fact, they could be helpful in some ways, but majority factions are to be feared. Is that notion antiquated in an age of social media when truly minority views that may be fascist or anti-democratic get amplified so much that they almost seem to take over the conversation, even though they're just a minority?
So I think that social media plays a huge part today because it almost acts as its own present day mob rule. And since there are these echo chambers, and if you see one thing that you interact with, then you only see that side on your feed, then that also contributes to this idea that people think everyone else thinks what they think, and they also don't get other opinions. And it's also extremely difficult to get unbiased opinions at all on social media. So I think that that's a really big issue that a lot of people don't realize because they don't see both sides.
In addition, I believe that there is a higher chance of anti-democratic movements and fascist movements in social media because that can be amplified. And social media is definitely almost hiding behind a screen. You don't have to physically be there, physically speaking about these kind of controversial topics. And especially this is amplified on social media where, it can't necessarily be tracked back directly to you. And this is also very dangerous for mob rule and the idea of factions coming together and overthrowing the minority.
Thank you.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the concepts you brought up in your opening, this idea of pure democracy, and generally speaking, the size of our country somewhat limits that. Are there aspects of direct democracy or pure democracy within either state, local, or federal government that exist? And do you think those are generally a good thing? Or are they, do they present challenges of, as you were saying, mob rule and other aspects of that?
So one aspect that is here in the US federally is electing a president, because although there is an aspect of representatives helping with that, there is the popular vote of people going and voting. So that is one aspect in modern day America. And I think that that is really crucial because that kind of incorporates both the representatives and the people. And I think that that's a really important thing because it doesn't just cater to one side, and it definitely includes the people's opinions.
Let me also give you kind of an example. Some states have referendums and specific ballot propositions, things like that, that they put up for vote directly from the members of the public who can vote yes or no without going through their elected representatives. And one sort of variant, I guess, or example of that is in California, trying to recall essentially their governor. Do you think that's a healthy thing, a healthy power to have limited or expanded ability for direct democracy for the individual citizens to be able to play that kind of a role? Or are there dangers to that?
I believe that there is somewhat of a good aspect to that, where the people are directly saying what they believe, and if they are not happy with the representative, they are able to get that opinion out there. I do think it's hard because with people directly voting, with more of a pure democracy sort of stance to it, there is that ability for voices to be drowned out and taken over by the majority. But I believe, of course, this is important for people to be able to express exactly what they're thinking and not having to only rely on a delegate to represent what they're thinking and not take their own personal bias into it.
I agree with that, and I think it's important for people in the general public to do civic engagement and participate in their government and what happens to them. But I also think that one of the dangers of that is that the people's opinions can get drowned out by the majority. And in addition, the general public is not always educated on things with politics, so that can be dangerous if people are not enlightened and educated, because then decisions can be made that may not be beneficial to them.
Thank you.
Let me take it back to the social media. I really like your application of some of these ideas of social media. One of you raised the concern of the ability of individuals to post anonymously, and that lets them do things they otherwise would not. I would, though, call your attention to the fact that many of the founders did this. They chose these strange pseudonyms, Brutus, Sentinel, Publius. They wanted to hide their identity. So maybe you could speak to that point again and maybe clarify that for me.
I feel like it has obviously its ups and downs. Like, as we can see, the Federalist Papers were written in this kind of style in the newspaper they were released, and it was shown who wrote them. But like you said, Publius, Alexander Hamilton has done that before.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Has done that before, and I feel like it's important that nowadays anyone can pretend or imitate anything. And I feel like it's important to note that even though that happens, it can have its ups and downs to the country as a whole.
Okay, New Mexico, very nice job. Now we're just going to offer some constructive criticism. I thought your opening remarks were very well polished. It showed that you put a lot of work into that, and I think it was an effective delivery by all of you. So well done with that. I very much like the mentioning of civic virtue. Surprisingly, I haven't heard that mentioned much today, and I think it's a very important concept and theme of the American founding that needs more attention. And as I mentioned in my questions, I really liked how you connected this to social media. I teach political science, and I hammer this down that this is one of the most important issues, and that your generation is really going to make the big decisions here. So I'm glad you're thinking about it and you're doing so critically.
I agree. This was a great discussion, great dialogue, well prepared, strong writing. I appreciated right out of the box. You stated your thesis on the trustee and delegate approach. And I wish we had had more time. I was curious about your thoughts of whether the House of Representatives should be drastically increased in size, whether we currently are able to avoid the cabals of the few, or whether we've been taken hostage by them is an open question still. And then the social media aspect, very few teams have discussed that. I think it's very important. So thank you for bringing that up. I think the challenge is that we're not just seeing the irrational majority as the danger that Madison probably feared, is that the irrational minority has the same size soapbox and can put any kind of crazy things out there. And I'm not sure if we had the founders with us today, what they would tell us, how they would advise us. And that would be an interesting thought experiment. If I was going to recommend anything, there were a few phrases that were used that were historically accurate. Mob rule, and we talk about echo chambers today. Those are perfectly legitimate terms, but you should be able to get behind them to explore, if there are elites fearing mob rule, as they were, is that a legitimate concern, or is there some racism and sexism and a lot of things going on behind that we should really excavate before we're comfortable using their terms? But this was very, very well done, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to sort of belabor what my colleagues have already said, but again, I think one of the things that stood out to all of us was this idea, the social media discussion, because it was so rich and robust, and you really grabbed it. And I think we could have talked a lot more about that, because it's an interesting topic and how that translates. And it was interesting as well, the anonymity aspect. What's new is not always necessarily as new as we think it is. And a lot of these things were happening in the founding era, obviously very different in the scope and reach of some of them. But the idea of how human beings interact with each other in a lot of these things is probably not as novel and new as we might think it is. And then just a question I put out there about the idea of pure democracy or direct democracy, and there are places in this country that do it, and it's an interesting thing from a geographical perspective. A lot of them are out west from where I am, Indiana, and so there are those dynamics that I think some states, you have a whole book basically of ballot initiatives, and then you are the one voting on those, not your elected representative. And what does that say about the level of, either that idea of a trustee or representative, or something else, direct democracy. So anyway, great. There's so much here, great discussion, and it's obvious that you spent a lot of time getting into it, and we enjoy talking with you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This wraps up New Mexico Unit 2, Division D for their hearing. If you want to thank the judges, feel free. Now is the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck to you.
Thank you to the judges. Wish I could shake your hands
Thank you very
Good
much,
job.
everyone.
next year.